Good morning. Happy Friday and welcome to Rising. We have a great show for you today. Amber, how you doing?
Doing well. How are you?
Good. I'm excited for the weekend. It's Valentine's Day. Love is in the air.
Yeah. Any big romantic plans?
You know what? I pray Colin's going to surprise me. I haven't heard them yet. What about you?
We're going to Nashville to see Clint Black at the Ryman.
Nice. So you have the exact opposite. Big plans lined up and everything. I'm like, okay, let's see what happens.
Jonathan's a big planner.
Oh, good. Okay,
Yeah.
So are you more of the attendee in the relationship?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, wow. I'm the planner. I
Passenger
wish.
princess.
I pray to be the passenger princess.
All right. Coming up on Rising, President Trump announced that the EPA was revoking a scientific finding that was the central basis to fight climate change.
Plus, the House passed the GOP's Save America Act, which would require Americans to show photo ID at the ballot and present proof of citizenship before registering to vote. Now, many Democrats, however, are sounding the alarm.
And a bit of a shakeup inside the Trump administration as the head of antitrust has stepped down after reported clashes with Attorney General Pam Bondi. But first, Lindsey, what's in your lens?
Let's get to it. So the Trump administration says it's ending Operation Metro Surge in Minnesota after 2 months of aggressive immigration enforcement that has sparked protests and tragically left 2 U.S. citizens, Renee Good and Alex Preddy, dead. Now, border czar Tom Homan made the announcement yesterday.
I have proposed, and President Trump has concurred, that this surge operation conclude. A significant drawdown has already been underway this week and will continue to the next week.
Homan says the surge is ending because cooperation between federal, state, and local law enforcement has improved, meaning more immigration detentions will now happen inside jails rather than through street operations. He also says local agencies are responding more quickly and consistently to protests. Governor Tim Walz acknowledged the fear won't disappear overnight, writing on X, quote, "The long road to recovery starts now. The impact on our economy, our schools, and people's lives won't be reversed overnight. That work starts today." At a press conference, Walz emphasized that Minnesota has always supported targeted enforcement and that nothing fundamentally changed the state's approach. And that's where things get a little complicated. So for months, the Trump administration has framed this crackdown as a mission to deport the worst of the worst. But according to an internal Department of Homeland Security document obtained by CBS News, ICE made roughly 393,000 arrests across the country between last year and this year. Yet less than 14% of those arrested had charges or convictions for violent crimes like homicide, robbery, sexual assault, kidnapping, or arson. At the same time, ICE official Marcos Charles suggested detainers sent to the state's jails and prison weren't being honored. But then he later acknowledged that the Minnesota Department of Corrections had fully cooperated. DHS has said there are about 1,360 people with ICE detainers in Minnesota prisons and jails. The Minnesota Department of Corrections says that number is closer to 300. Minnesota Department of Corrections Commissioner Paul Schnell pushed back forcefully, saying that ICE officials, quote, "continue to publicly repeat information that is inaccurate and misleading. This is no longer a simple misunderstanding." Now, since December 1st, the state has turned over 14 people with ICE detainers after they completed their sentences, according to CNN. It's important to note before an inmate can be turned over to ICE, they must complete their prison sentence. So here's my question. If Minnesota was honoring these detainers, if the dispute was about data and communication, why did it take a massive federal surge, widespread fear, and 2 American lives lost to reach this middle ground? Republicans argue sanctuary policies tie the hands of law enforcement. Democrats argue the sweeps were overly aggressive and lacked accountability. Both sides have their talking points, but governance isn't supposed to be about proving a point. It's supposed to be about problem solving. Politics is hard, immigration is hard. But when cooperation was possible all along, and when the facts were this murky, escalation was not inevitable. It was a choice, and the cost of that choice is something Minnesota is now left to live with.
All right. So let's get into this. I think a lot of people on the MAGA side are viewing this as a capitulation that the Trump administration has allowed the protests and the government officials in Minnesota to basically dictate their immigration policy But after looking at some reporting from independent journalist Julio Rosas, I actually don't think that's the case. What's most important, I think, to point out here is that they are not ending all enforcement operations in Minnesota, just the surge posture. So those extra individuals that were sent in to create this ability to respond to protests, to be able to have enforcement operations out in the community, that's what's ending, because now they're satisfied that the local officials are going to cooperate with the detainer requests, not just at prisons and people who are serving sentences, but also at the jails, which are run by the local law enforcement agencies, as opposed to the Department of Corrections. So basically what they did, according to this report from Julio Rosas, is they exercised with this logic that if the local officials weren't going to cooperate, then they were going to send in a mass amount of federal law enforcement officials, and then they would have two choices. They could either watch their city have an effective government takeover from the feds, or they could choose to go ahead and cooperate and allow these tensions to fall. They chose the latter.
Yeah, I think when people are looking at this, Tom Homan, who's the person that I'm mostly taking the information from because he did the press conference, he was kind of vague in saying conversations basically are happening between local law enforcement and federal officials that maybe weren't happening, that we didn't see. And I'll be the first one to say that Mayor Fry is very vocal, still condemning this whole thing. And I don't think that that is pushing us any way forward. I do think Tom Homan coming into the city did help de-escalate. But when I look at the fact that Minnesota and local officials have been, for at least since we know December 1st, according to the commissioner of the Minnesota Department of Corrections, Paul Schnell, have been cooperating and telling, ICE, listen, we said our policy remains largely the same from before you guys even sent the first group of ICE agents into our city. I don't really understand if nothing is really changing about the jail and prison portion, because I think that's where we agreed last week.
Well, jails and prisons are operated by different individuals. So the Department of Corrections operates the prisons. The jails are where criminals are held, or alleged criminals are held, basically when they're being charged, right? So that's done by local law enforcement,
right?
Not the Department of Corrections.
So the state's largest jail operator, the Hennepin County Sheriff's Office, they released a statement and they said our policies remain unchanged. They said, quote, "We have not made any changes to the policies that guide our enforcement with ICE." So they're basically doubling down on what they were already doing. So what I'm saying is that the Department of Corrections is staying the same and cooperating. The head of the state's largest jail operator is saying we're not doing anything different. And so Tom Homan essentially is in the same battle with the jails and in the same partnership with the corrections department. So what can
I don't
we go
think
off
the
of?
sheriff's office is being honest there, to be totally frank with you. But what Homan also said in his press conference yesterday was that they absolutely reserve the right to go back to surge enforcement if the local officials do not adhere to the promises that they apparently made to the administration behind the scene. They also had a lot of success while they were there. 4,000 arrests of illegal aliens, as well as 3,300 missing children found out of that 300,000 group that were lost during the Biden administration. So the metrics make very clear that they were doing what they promised that they would do when Trump was still campaigning for office.
Well, I hope that, like you said, the surge doesn't go back and start all over again after Tom Homan came in and tried to be, the reserved entity in this whole thing, and a problem that largely started from pointing fingers that could have been handled, I think, beforehand. When we look at this back, from our perspective now, seeing historically what just happened over the last few months, I do think a lot of it could have been avoided with some of the conversations that are just happening now, unfortunately. And I'm not afraid to point to people like Mayor Fry and our president and say, can everybody tone it down and have conversations way earlier and stop pointing fingers?
Yeah, we also have to remember, of course, that this was all started because of the massive fraud investigation in Minnesota. And that was why this surge happened initially, was because the local officials had not been doing enough to prevent that from happening and had allowed some illegal aliens to engage in that fraud as well. So Tom Homan also promised that there will be hundreds of special agents remaining in Minnesota to make sure that that fraud is still cracked down on.
Yeah, and they're going to definitely stay on top of that because that was the biggest issue probably in the last few months. The Save America Act is sparking fireworks, and it did during a CNN panel. That's next for that hotly debated bill. We'll be right back.